USS Shangri-La was one of 24 Essex-class aircraft carriers completed during a shortly after World War II for the United States Navy. Commissioned in 1944, Shangri-La participated in several campaigns in the Pacific Theater of Operations in World War II, earning 2 battle stars. Like many of her sister ships, she was decommissioned shortly after the end of the war, but was modernized and recommissioned in the early 1950s, and redesignated as an attack carrier. She operated in both the Pacific and Atlantic, Mediterranean for several years, and late in her career was redesignated as an anti-submarine carrier. She earned 3 battle stars for service in the Vietnam War. Shangri-La was decommissioned in 1971 and sold for scrap in 1988. Nomenclature. The naming of the ship was a radical departure from the general practice of the time, which was to name aircraft carriers after battles of previous U.S. Navy ships. After the Doolittle raid, launched from the aircraft carrier Hornet, President Roosevelt answered a reporter's question by saying that the raid had been launched from Shangri-La, the fictional faraway land of the James Hilton novel Lost Horizon. Construction and commissioning. Shangri-La was one of the long-hull Essex-class ships. She was laid down by the Norfolk Navy Yard at Portsmouth, Virginia on 15 January 1943, and was launched on 24 February 1944. Sponsored by Josephine Doolittle, Shangri-La was commissioned on 15 September 1944, with Captain James D. Barner in command. Service history. World War II. Shangri-La completed fitting out at Norfolk and took her shakedown cruise to Trinidad between 15 September and 21 December 1944, at which time she returned to Norfolk. On 17 January 1945, she stood out of Hampton Roads, formed up with large cruiser Guam and destroyer Harry E. Hubbard, and sailed for Panama. The 3 ships arrived at Cristobal, Panama Canal Zone on 23 January and transited the canal the next day. Shangri-La departed from Balboa on 25 January and arrived at San Diego, California on 4 February. She loaded passengers, stores, and extra planes for transit to Hawaii and got underway on 7 February. Upon her arrival at Pearl Harbor on 15 February, she commenced 2 months of duty, qualifying land-based Navy pilots in carrier landings. On 10 April, she weighed anchor for Ulithi Atoll, where she arrived 10 days later. After an overnight stay in the lagoon, Shangri-La departed Ulithi in company with destroyers Haggard and Stemble to report for duty with Vice Admiral Mark A. Mitch's Task Force 58. On 24 April, she joined Task Group 58.4 while it was conducting a fueling rendezvous with TG 50.8. The next day, Shangri-La and her air group, CV-85, launched the first strike against the Japanese. The target was Okino-Daitojima, a group of islands several hundred miles to the southeast of Okinawa. Her planes successfully destroyed radar and radio installations there, and, upon the recovery, the task group sailed for Okinawa. Shangri-La supplied combat air patrols for the task group and close air support for the 10th Army on Okinawa before returning to Ulithi on 14 May. While at Ulithi, Shangri-La became the flagship of Carrier Task Force 2. Vice Admiral John S. McCain, Sr. hoisted his flag on Shangri-La on 18 May. 6 days later, TG 58.4, with Shangri-La in company, sortied from the lagoon. On 28 May, TG 58.4 became TG 38.4 and McCain relieved Mishra as commander, TF-38, retaining Shangri-La as his flagship. On 2–3 June, the task force launched airstrikes on the Japanese home islands, aimed particularly at Kyushu, the southern on most of the major islands. Facing the stiffest airborne resistance to date, Shangri-La's airmen suffered the heaviest casualties. On 4–5 June, she moved off to the northwest to avoid a typhoon. Then, on the 6th of June, her planes returned to close air support duty over Okinawa. On the 8th of June, her air group hit Kyushu again, and on the following day, they came back to Okinawa. On the 10th of June, the task force cleared Okinawa for Leyte, conducting drills en route. Shangri-La entered Leyte Gulf and anchored in San Pedro Bay on the 13th of June. She remained at anchor there for the rest of June, engaged in upkeep and recreation. On the 1st of July, Shangri-La got underway from Leyte to return to the combat zone. On the 2nd, the oath of office of Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Air was administered to John L. Sullivan on board Shangri-La, the first ceremony of its type ever undertaken in a combat zone. 8 days later, her air group commenced a series of airstrikes against Japan which lasted until the capitulation on the 15th of August. Shangri-La's planes ranged the length of the island chain during these raids. On the 10th, they attacked Tokyo, the first raid there since the strikes of the previous February. On 14–15 July, they pounded Hoshi and Hokkaido, and on the 18th of July, returned to Tokyo, also bombing battleship Nagato, moored close to shore at Yokosuka. From 20 to 22 July, Shangri-La joined the Logistics Group for Fuel Replacement Aircraft, a mail. By the 24th of July, her pilots were attacking shipping in the vicinity of Kyoto. They returned the next day for a repeat performance before departing for a 2-day replenishment period on 26–27 July. On the following day, Shangri-La's aircraft damaged light cruiser Oyodo and battleship Haruna, the latter so badly that she beached and flooded. She later had to be abandoned. They pummeled Tokyo again on the 30th of July, then cleared the area to replenish on the 31st of July and the 1st of August. Shangri-La spent the next 4 days in the retirement area waiting for a typhoon to pass. On the 9th of August, after heavy fog had caused the cancellation of the previous day's missions, the carrier sent her planes aloft to bomb Hoshi and Hokkaido once again. The next day, they raided Tokyo and central Honshu, then retired from the area for logistics. She evaded another typhoon on 11–12 August, then hit Tokyo again on the 13th of August. After replenishing on the 14th of August, she sent planes to strike the airfields around Tokyo on the morning of the 15th of August 1945. Soon thereafter, Japan's capitulation was announced, and the fleet was ordered to cease hostilities. Shangri-La steamed around in the strike area from 15 to 23 August, patrolling the Honshu area on the latter date. For the 23rd of August to 16th of September, her planes sortied on missions of mercy, airdropping supplies to Allied prisoners of war in Japan. Shangri-La entered Tokyo Bay on the 16th of September, almost 2 weeks after the surrender ceremony on board battleship Missouri, and remained there until the 1st of October. Departing Japan, she arrived at Okinawa on the 4th of October, staying until the 6th of October, and then headed for the United States in company with Task Unit 38.1.1. She sailed into San Pedro Bay on the 21st of October and stayed at Long Beach for 3 weeks. On the 5th of November, she shifted to San Diego, departing that port a month later for Bremerton, Washington. She entered Puget Sound on the 9th of December, underwent availability until the 30th of December, and then returned to San Diego. Post-war, upon her return, Shangri-La began normal operations out of San Diego, primarily engaged in pilot carrier landing qualifications. In May 1946, she sailed from the Central Pacific to participate in Operation Crossroads, the atomic bomb tests conducted at Bikini Atoll. Following this, she made a brief training cruise to Pearl Harbor, then wintered at Puget Sound Naval Shipyard. In March 1947, she deployed again, calling at Pearl Harbor and Sydney, Australia. When she returned to the United States, Shangri-La was decommissioned and placed in the reserve fleet at San Francisco on 7 November 1947. Shangri-La recommissioned on 10 May 1951. Captain Francis L. Busey in command. For the next year, she conducted training and readiness operations out of Boston, Massachusetts. Reclassified as an attack carrier in 1952, she returned to Puget Sound that fall and decommissioned again on 14 November, this time from modernization at Puget Sound Naval Shipyard. During the next 2 years, she received an angled flight deck, twin steam catapults, and her aircraft elevators and arresting gear were overhauled. At a cost of approximately $7 million, she was virtually a new ship when she commissioned for the third time on 10 January 1955. Captain Roscoe L. Newman commanding, she was the first operational U.S. carrier with an angled flight deck. She conducted intensive fleet training for the remainder of 1955, then deployed to the Far East on 5 January 1956. Until 1960, she alternated Western Pacific cruises with operations out of San Diego. On 16 March 1960, she put to sea from San Diego en route to her new home port, Mayport, Florida. She entered Mayport after visits to Callao, Peru, Valparaiso, Chile, Port of Spain, Trinidad, Bayonne, New Jersey, and Norfolk, Virginia. After 6 weeks of underway training in the local operating area around Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, she embarked upon her first Atlantic deployment, a NATO exercise followed by Liberty in Southampton, England. Almost immediately after her return to Mayport, Shangri-La was ordered back to sea, this time to the Caribbean in response to trouble in Guatemala and Nicaragua. She returned to Mayport on 25 November and remained in port for more than 2 months. Between 1961 and 1970, Shangri-La alternated between deployments to the Mediterranean and operations in the Western Atlantic. Out of Mayport, she sailed east for her first tour of duty with the 6th Fleet on 2 February 1961. She returned to the United States that fall and entered the New York Naval Shipyard back in Mayport. By the beginning of 1962, Shangri-La stood out again for the Mediterranean on 7 February. After about 6 months of cruising with the 6th Fleet, she departed the Mediterranean in mid-August and arrived in Mayport on 28 August. Following a month's stay at her home port, the aircraft carrier headed for New York and a major overhaul. Shangri-La was modified extensively during her stay in the yard. 4 of her 5 in-mounts were removed, but she received a new air search and height-finding radar and a near-arrest system. In addition, much of her electrical and engineering equipment was renovated. After sea trials and visits to Bayonne and Norfolk, Shangri-La returned to Mayport for a week in late March 1963, then put to sea for operations in the Caribbean. 18 months of similar duty followed before Shangri-La weighed anchor for another deployment. On the 1st of October 1963, she headed back to the 6th Fleet for a 7-month tour. Vietnam. Shangri-La continued her United States 2nd Fleet and 6th Fleet assignments for the next 6 years. For the 15th of February 1965 to the 20th of September 1965, she made a Mediterranean deployment with carrier Air Wing 10 embarked. In the fall of 1965, Shangri-La was accidentally rammed by the destroyer Newman Cape Airy during war games. Shangri-La was struck below the waterline, breaching the hull. On the destroyer, one man was killed and another injured. The ship itself suffered a bent hull. There were no casualties on the carrier and the hull was quickly patched. As a result of this incident, she underwent an extensive overhaul during the winter of 1965 and the spring of 1966, this time at Philadelphia, then resumed operations as before. On the 30th of June 1969, she was redesignated an anti-submarine warfare carrier. In 1970, Shangri-La returned to the Western Pacific after an absence of 10 years. She got underway from Mayport on the 5th of March, stopped at Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, from 13 to 16 March, and headed east through the Atlantic and Indian Oceans. She arrived in Subic Bay, Philippines on the 4th of April, and during the next 7 months launched combat sorties from Yankee Station. Her tours of duty on Yankee Station were punctuated by frequent logistics trips to Subic Bay, by visits to Manila and Hong Kong in October, and by 12 days in dry dock Yokosuka, Japan, in July. On the 9th of November, Shangri-La stood out of Subic Bay to return home. En route to Mayport, she visited Sydney, Australia, Wellington, New Zealand, and Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. She arrived in Mayport on the 16th of December and began preparations for inactivation. After inactivation overhaul at the Boston Naval Shipyard, South Annex, Shangri-La decommissioned on the 30th of July 1971. She was placed in the Atlantic Reserve Fleet and berthed at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. Fate: Shangri-La remained in the Reserve Fleet for the next 11 years, and was stricken from the Naval Vessel Register on the 15th of July 1982. She was retained by MARAD for several years to provide spare parts for the training carrier Lexington. On the 9th of August 1988, she was sold for scrap and later towed to Taiwan for demolition. An anchor from Shangri-La is in Litchfield, Minnesota. One of Shangri-La's 4 propellers is on display outside Meading Seafood in Milford, Delaware. Awards: Shangri-La earned 2 battle stars for World War II service and 3 battle stars for service in the Vietnam War.